It's less that I chose to take on the fight than that the fight came to me.
Harvard is just one of the many elite universities under attack by the Trump administration.
I think Harvard's a disgrace. I think what they did was a disgrace.
Trump has threatened to revoke billions of dollars in federal funding and is pushing for government oversight on campuses. But Harvard is fighting back, and President Alan Garber has become the face of this resistance. Why have you chosen to take on the fight?
We were faced with a set of demands that address some problems that I and others recognize as real problems. But the means of addressing those problems is what was so objectionable. In particular, this call to give the federal government the ability, for example, to examine in detail all of our admission records, the ability to weigh in on who we hire to the faculty. It's not that the goal, for example, of increasing ideological diversity on campus is one that I disagree with. It's the means of achieving it.
Was it a problem that some of these universities, notably Columbia, made a decision early on to cave to some of the demands?
I would say that our decision was not influenced strongly in one direction or the other by the Columbia experience. But what I have heard is that Columbia had still not resolved their issues with the federal government after many weeks of negotiations. So undoubtedly, that has made institutions think that that may not always be the most promising path.
Harvard took the bold step of making the administration's demands public. Hours later, the government froze more than $2 billion in research funding. Harvard is suing to release those funds. So you have the country's largest endowment. Famously, it's over $52 billion. And one of the questions that we get all the time from readers is, why does Harvard need billions more in federal funding?
It's really very simple. The vast bulk of our federal funding is for support of research through grants and contracts. These are agreements that oblige the university to carry out work that the federal government has approved in order to advance national interests. For example, quantum science, which right now is a huge strategic area for the nation, particularly in our competition with China. They support this research because of the economic benefits, and they support the research because so much of it is dedicated to preventing and treating disease. So we're paid to do the work, and we're happy to do that, but we should never think of this as a gift. It has many strings attached.
But nevertheless, I wonder whether, given this aggravating showdown that you're having with the administration, are there moments where you think Harvard should seek to wean itself off completely from public assistance?
So we certainly are thinking about longer term how we fund our work and whether or not we should lessen our reliance on the federal government. But having said that, we think it's an honor to be able to perform work for the federal government addressing national priorities. The nation is facing daunting challenges, security challenges, economic challenges, health challenges. We can help.
So even if you win the lawsuit, the administration can continue to make life difficult for Harvard. We are speaking just hours after President Trump posted on Truth Social that he would be revoking Harvard's tax-exempt status, saying it's what they deserve. How big a problem is this for you?
If the government goes through with a plan to revoke our tax-exempt status, it would, number one, be highly illegal unless there is some reasoning that we have not been exposed to that would justify this dramatic move. But tax-exempt status is granted to educational institutions to enable them to successfully carry out their mission of education and for research universities of research. Obviously, that would be severely impaired if we were to lose our tax-exempt status. And I should add, it would be destructive to Harvard, but the message that it sends to the educational community would be a very dire one, which suggests that political disagreements could be used as a basis to pose what might be an existential threat to so many educational institutions.
So you've set out this case for all the wonderful things that Harvard does, but nevertheless, there is a perception out there, a very negative perception. A lot of people in America really hate Harvard. Why do you think that is?
I can't address the reasons why everybody who has that view feels the way they do. And by the way, I understand your question to be not only about Harvard, but institutions that we compete with for students and faculty. But I will say that we've had some real problems that we should address. One of them is the perceived lack of ideological diversity among our faculty and among our students. Now, I have to say that there's recent evidence that makes me think maybe this is overblown, even though I think it's a real problem. But the perception is out there that we are a almost uniformly left-wing institution.
What about the faculty, though? Because a survey that was carried out in 2023 found that something like 77% of Harvard faculty identified as liberal or very liberal, and only just under 3% identified as conservative. How did Harvard get to a position where there was that sort of split in the faculty?
One thing I can tell you is it's nothing deliberate about our hiring policies or our tenure policies. And I think there are certain fields where people with more liberal or left-wing points of view feel more welcome. It may be that we don't have as many conservatives as we should have. Part of it also may be that people don't feel comfortable speaking out when they disagree. Part of what we need to do is make sure that in the classroom and in other settings, we promote the idea that it doesn't matter what your personal views are, you need to teach in a way that is fair to multiple points of view.
You were the class of 1976 and you're now president. How has the Harvard that you entered as a student, how is that different from the Harvard of today?
In many ways, it's less different than people believe. But I would also say there are some real differences. Students today find it much harder to have conversations with one another about difficult subjects, particularly with someone they don't know well. And to me, that is a big loss. And it's something my colleagues have also recognized and made us very concerned.
These concerns came to a head after October the 7th, 2023, when student protests against the war in Gaza spread on campus, fueling calls for a crackdown on anti-Semitism. Last week, Harvard released the findings of two separate task forces, which found that both anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim bias are pervasive on campus, leaving students on both sides of the political divide feeling silenced and unsafe. At what point did you realize that or think that Harvard had an anti-Semitism problem?
I had hints of it before October 7th of 2023, but I think it was on October 8th when I went to Hillel and heard directly from Israeli students in particular about how they had felt that they were shunned and avoided on campus. And hearing from them firsthand was very deeply moving and troubling to me. At that point, I didn't have an idea of the extent of it, but in the months that followed, there was more and more evidence that this was the case.
I mean, you did another report as well, which suggested that some of the Muslim students on campus also felt that they weren't being listened to. So you've got these two competing groups. Is this a problem that can be solved?
I certainly hope that it can be solved, but we have to recognize that we need different tools to address these problems than many people would think of at first. What we're dealing with here is predominantly a form of shunning and social exclusion. This has to be an effort to change hearts and minds, to have empathy for one another, not to start with the attitude that someone with a different identity is not just as human as you are.
One of the issues that you've had to confront, along with everything else, has been donors who've stepped away after October the 7th. Do you think those donors will come back?
I'm optimistic. The donors that have spoken to me care a lot about Harvard, and they want to see change. And the kinds of changes that I want to see tend to be not that different from what they are looking for.
not just for Harvard, but sort of more broadly for higher education in America, which should be an absolute jewel in America's crown. Something's gone horribly wrong. How do you restore America's own faith in its higher education institutions?
That is really the critical question. Part of this is explaining what we already do. In terms of scientific excellence, the work of research that's done by our faculty and by our students, by almost any measure, we are doing a great job. But we're not doing everything that we need to do. I want to point out one thing. Harvard is the oldest university in North America, and we did not succeed over the centuries by never making mistakes. We've made many, many mistakes over our long history. We've succeeded by correcting our mistakes, by pivoting, by being self-critical. That's what we need to do today.